So this talk that I'm going to give is about the influences that my generation, the baby boomers, that my generation had, that led us into engineering. A number of people in this room have heard some of the things I'm going to talk about. So the basic talk is in a couple different stages. One is how the Apollo space program impacted baby boomers as engineers, but also how Star Trek did too, because Star Trek premiered in the middle of the Apollo space program, and it was at the time something incredibly revolutionary. This was the mid-60s. Now, if you look back at the original series now, they're very campy and cartoon-like. They were extraordinary. It was an extraordinary series at the time. It's never been done on TV. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present what the title Science Fiction, Fact, and Future. So the science fiction was, what was my science fiction 50 years ago? What did the future look like 50 years ago, meaning that in this particular case, Kennedy said, we're going to put a person on the moon. He said it in 1961, we're going to do it by the end of the decade, and we landed in 1969. So science future at that time was, hey, we are headed to the moon. It hadn't happened yet, so it was still in the future. Okay? Fact was what we knew. Science fiction was, this isn't possible. Okay? Maybe it'll exist someday, but this isn't possible right now. So I'm going to try and tie all those things together between the Apollo space program and Star Trek, and then I want to walk that out to your science fact, okay, what it is that's true for you now, and show you where baby boomers, my generation, started, where you're starting compared to where we started. And then try and imagine the same amount of change, of advancement, of progress in the 50 years, it's 50-year span between when I'm giving this speech of the mid-60s to now 2017 to 50 years from maybe 2007, okay, to 2050 so. So let's see if I can work the AB. All right, so the general inspiration, I just gave that to you. If you'd ask any engineer or scientist from my particular era what it is that really inspired them, okay, they would cite these two themes. The Apollo space program, which was my science fact, what was real at the time, and what the expected future was going to be, and actually turned into our eventual future. All right? And then there was Star Trek. So juxtapose these two things. We're putting a man on the moon, all right? And now you have Star Trek, true science fiction. Putting a man on the moon was science fiction. It was in the 50s, it was science fiction. There were science fiction movies about sending somebody to the moon. Just a few years later, a decade later, we're actually planning on doing it. And within that decade, we put somebody on the moon. So science fiction has to take a leap far forward from what is currently reality. So it's always out there somewhere further. To a certain extent, it can be a predictor. So Kennedy claimed in '61, before the decade is out, landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. To contemplate this, from 1961 to 1969, I'm going to walk you through this a little bit. No computers, okay? Basic electromechanical computers. Okay? And we're going to put somebody on the moon. In 8 years, we're going to put somebody on the moon. So those are the dates. Took 4 days to get there, all right? About 4 hours to 8 hours to actually step off once they landed to get on the lunar surface, and another 4 days to get them back. They pulled this off. So this was a huge thing for our generation because this was this big space race between us and the Russians, between the US and the USSR. And the USSR got a leap on us. And they had satellites in orbit, and they had nuclear weapons. And we didn't have satellites in orbit, and we had nuclear weapons. That was a real honest fear. It was a national security issue. Okay? Now, I'm a kid. I'm not worried about that. I just think it's really cool that we're launching rockets into space. Okay, and this is national news every day. It's national news. The Mercury program, the Gemini program, the Apollo program, this was the biggest technological driver of the 60s. It's what was driving technology. So here's the first thing. We put a man on the moon in 1969. Look at the dates for the first microprocessors. It's after we put somebody on the moon. In fact, it's almost after we put everybody we've ever put on the moon. So in 1971, the first 4-bit microprocessor came out. It was not developed as a microprocessor. It was developed to power a calculator. And the people who were developing it said, you know what? We could make this programmable. So they inadvertently came up with the microprocessor. 4-bit microprocessor. It processed half a byte at a time. Then in '72, Intel came out with the first 8-bit microprocessor, okay, a year later. So these weren't on the Apollo missions. So what computing power did the Apollo have? So there are two modules, the command module and the lunar excursion module. The lunar excursion module is the module you see sitting on the moon. Well, here it is. It was developed in 1966. All right, the Apollo guidance computer. One of the first integrated circuit computers, meaning it was not using electromechanical relays. It operated at 2.048 megahertz. That's a period, not a comma. 2.048 megahertz. It had 2K of 16-bit words of RAM, which were magnetic core. So magnetic core is hand-wound little magnetic donuts that have wires running through them. All right. And it's actually destructive reads. And it had 36K words of ROM, so that would have been your program memory. It was 2 feet by 1 foot by a half a foot, weighed 70 pounds, consumed 55 watts. All right, and it was designed from 2,800 individual integrated circuits that held 2 dual NOR gates with 3 inputs. They were hand wire wrapped. If you've ever seen wire wrapping, okay? It's wired, it's leads going through the back of a breadboard, and then it is just wrapped with wires, not even soldered, and then they epoxied it. All right? This was the computer that took us to the moon and back. It looked like this. Now, that's 2 feet by 1 foot by 6 inches. It weighs 70 pounds. It's about the size of a large desktop computer and weighs twice as much. That's the computing power that took 30 astronauts to the moon. Now, they didn't all go on, but we put 30 astronauts around the moon in 5 years. 12 of them walked on it. 6 of them actually drove on the moon. So we put 3 lunar rovers and they drove on the moon. Oh, there's another astronaut that drove on the moon because they drove a golf ball on the moon. Okay? I'm not counting that one. And we returned them all safely back to Earth. 30 for 30. There was Apollo 13. That had to go around the moon to get back. Okay? But we returned them safely as well. So we did that without gigahertz or gigabytes or any of the high-speed digital communications that we have nowadays. No pocket calculators, no PCs, no laptops, no smartphones. Okay? None of the technology that you have now. There's no internet, no World Wide Web, no Google, no Stack Overflow. How do you get around without Stack Overflow? Okay? Most of you guys that have me would fail my course without Stack Overflow. No LCDs, no GPS. None of this stuff was available. So not only was it not available for the astronauts to use, it was not available as part of the mission, it wasn't available to do the development. All right? So think about, and this was my reality in the 80s yet. Think about not having access to Google or the internet or Stack Overflow to do any type of research, to do any of the projects that you've taken on now, okay? To do the robotics that Nick's working on, okay? To do the shuttle, to do the your college shuttle tracking, because Joe actually threw a GPS module on the shuttles and was working on a project for that. These weren't the kind of things that these folks were doing in the 60s. They weren't the things I was doing in the 80s when I was in school. Right? None of this stuff was available, and yet, we put somebody on the moon. Now, when I started school, high school, this was our calculator. All right? A slide rule. For me, in 1972, in high school, this was my scientific calculator. And yes, it had a holster, and yes, you were a true nerd walking around high school by carrying this thing on your belt. Okay? Now, interestingly enough, over the years, that hasn't changed much, all right? Because it turned into this calculator, the SR50, all right? 1974, $170, LED display, right? No programming or anything like that. $170 in 1974, right? But this also came in a case, right? And you put that on your belt. So now we've gone from a slide rule to this. Now, I forgot my smartphone today. I know that's unheard of for you guys. But my smartphone has a holster, and so all I've moved from is a calculator, or a slide rule on my belt, to a calculator on my belt, to a smartphone on my belt. So we sort of moved along that way. I still need a belt, all right, in order to hold that kind of stuff. So this is where we've gone. Okay, this is where they started. This is what was used to do the calculations for most of the space program. They didn't get a computer until 1967, 1968. So if you've seen the movie Hidden Figures, right, and if you haven't, you should, but if you've seen the movie Hidden Figures, you know that the term computer was not first applied to machines, it was applied to people. The people that were doing the calculations were called computers. Then, when we got machines to do it, they became computers. So what else we got here? All right, so that was my generation's science fact. That's what existed at the time, or came to exist. Because even the calculators didn't exist. So all that other stuff that I just mentioned that they didn't have, that was science fiction. That wasn't even science future. It wasn't. Science future would have been, here we can predict this and we know we're working towards it. Science fiction is, hey, I can imagine it, but I got no idea how we're going to get there. So it turned out to be science future. What I'm saying that is it turned into, a lot of this science fiction turned into, yeah, we are going to work towards that. And has since become science fact. So, Star Trek. So the first part was to boldly go basically to the moon. This is to boldly go where no man has gone before, where no person has gone before. It premiered in September 8th of 1966. So I gave this part of this lecture. I sort of started putting together in class last year. So I did a 50th anniversary Star Trek presentation to some of my classes. I was, 8 years old. Black and white TV. Has anybody ever seen a black and white TV? All right. Black and white TV, which is our main TV, is about this big, okay, with a CRT that's about this deep, and would just be planted in front of the TV every Thursday night from 8:30 to 9:30, because this was just such an incredible experience. This was a visualization of things that we had never seen before. They'd never been presented. It was real science fiction. It was based in reality, but it was pushed out about 300 years. It was truly revolutionary at the time. TOS, so the original series in the 60s, and even The Next Generation, which came out in the 80s, they were both revolutionary. So much, though, of what our the science fiction was then, in the 60s and the 80s, has either become science future, we know we're going to get there, it's just going to take time, or it's now science fact. It's now what your and our and my generation now looks at. So this part of the talk has to do with what is it that was introduced or shown in Star Trek that is now real. And there is a lot. There is quite a bit if you go back and look at it. So here's the first thing. When I was in high school, I really hated English. I hated writing. I wanted to solve problems, but I did not like writing assignments. The things I wanted to write about science fiction. I wanted to write about science. So in 10th grade, when I had to do book reports and I had to do creative writing, my English teacher, Mrs. Bose, did not really appreciate science fiction. So every single thing I wrote about science fiction. So I wrote a story, I wrote how Star Trek was affecting our everyday lives even back in the 70s. The first thing that Star Trek introduced that became reality was automatic sliding doors. So the very first episode of Star Trek on September 8, 1966, you're on the bridge, you'll walk up to the turbo lift, the doors open in front of you. Okay? This didn't exist. All right? This did not exist. It was 1966. They didn't have the sensors to do it. They didn't have the actuators to do it. It didn't exist. They immediately, within the first week of the series premiering, they immediately got calls from numerous hospital emergency rooms because they wanted to know how they were doing that and could they get the technology. So who knows how they were doing that?
They had people back there that pulled the doors open.
They had people back there that were pulling pulleys, pulling ropes that pulled the doors open. Okay? So what that did, though, was it said this is possible. Within a few years, they actually had these automatic sliding glass doors. All right? So there were two parts there. There's the sensor when you're walking up, okay, and it just opens in front of you. This is life truly imitating art. There's other examples of that too. So this is from the original series. Okay, this is the view screen on the bridge. That's a big flat panel display. We have them now. It took a long time to get there, but we have them now. They're hanging on the wall. Most of you have them. Okay, that was a completely science fiction because TVs, A, they couldn't be that big, and B, they were like this deep. And something this big that was a TV would have weighed thousands of pounds. Now we have them. So let me take you back to that slide. That's a huge LCD flat screen TV, color. Some of you have seen this. This is the world's very first commercially produced color LCD module from 1987. I happen to work for a startup company, and Lucky Gold Star, LG, or Lucky Gold Star at the time, LG, made these for us. It went in a color LCD fish finder. All right? This is $200 module in 1986. It's 48 by 96 pixels. All right? It's got a cold cathode fluorescent tube. It's this big. It's 48 by 96 pixels. Not 1920 by 2048 or anything like that. Okay? 48 by 96. That's about this big, okay, on this screen. On your cell phone, it's about that big. This was $200, okay, with discrete components. That's what it was in 1986. 30 years later, look at the size of the LCD screens we have. All right. Okay, flip phones. Guess what? The first flip phone, all right, was modeled after a communicator that appeared on Star Trek in 1966. The very first flip phones, that's where they came from. They couldn't make cell phones small when they first made them. They were big bricks if you've ever actually seen the original cell phones from the 80s. Okay? But when they got around to making them small, this is how they made them. They saw it from Star Trek. Life imitating art again. So, on Star Trek, they had this thing called the Universal Translator. How can they travel all across the galaxy and always speak English to somebody? Okay, well, the thing they were hiding from, they did talk about it, was that they had a universal translator, and so everybody would essentially hear, it would automatically translate for them. Well, that was impossible. That couldn't be done, all right, at the time. But we have Google Translate and Babelfish, which actually, Babelfish comes from a reference in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So when Babelfish came out, they named it after the Babelfish in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which was a little fish you put in your ear, and it could do the neural translating for you. So that's a universal translator. So we have that thing. Energy weapons. So my phaser, which has dilithium crystals have run out. So my phaser, okay? We now have energy weapons. We actually have lasers that are mounted on ships that can be targeted to a specific point on an approaching boat. So it doesn't have to kill anybody. They can actually target the engine on the boat and shut down the engine. And these lasers actually, these are in existence. Okay, they are mounted on some of our destroyers. We have laser cutting devices. So down at BD where I work, for those of you who know that, where I consult, we have a laser cutter that will cut through up to 1 or 2 inch metal. Now, this was impossible as well. Lasers actually existed in 1966, but you couldn't actually buy one. Now I can go out and buy a laser pointer. I can buy a laser, commercial laser, that I can shoot balloons at from here, and it will break the balloons, and you can set fire to paper. Right? There are also focused sonic weapons. So you may have heard, some of these things from Cuba about some U.S. Citizens being injured by some type of sonic weapon. But we actually have sonic weapons that we also deploy in the oceans so that we can disrupt boats that are coming at particular ships. These things have come to be 3D printers and copiers. All right, so that's the replicator. So the original replicator on TOS, original series, only replicated food. In the next generation, it replicated objects, not animate objects, just inanimate objects. On the left, replicator from TMG. On the right, actual 3D printer from the last couple years. Virtual reality. So the holodeck on next generation. Now, it's not quite the same thing, all right? But it's very close with an Oculus Rift and some of the other VR gear. All right? If you have all the actuators and things like that and some of the higher end stuff, you're actually suspended in a harness, and you can make all the motions, and it will respond to all your motions. So we have this thing now too. Augmented reality. So the Borg get a lot of credit in here, and that's Picard as the cutest of Borg. Okay. The Borg get a lot of credit in here for a number of different things, but we have a Microsoft HoloLens that's floating around upstairs right now. Okay, so the difference between virtual reality and augmented reality, virtual reality, you are immersed in a world that's being created for you. Augmented reality, you are in your real world and you are having information and visuals and audio added to your reality, to your current reality. So the HoloLens and Google Glass, both of those things do that. And they both stand alone. They have their own computers on. You don't have to be tethered to anything. This is a little bit of a stretch, but not too much. So the Borg. Anybody who knows about the Borg, they were all interconnected. They were one big hive mind. Well, social media, you're always connected if you want to be connected. And if you have a Bluetooth headset, all right, you can always be listening to whoever you want to be listening to and talking to them. If you throw a HoloLens on, you can actually see them in front of you. Okay, but also the wireless internet and Bluetooth connectivity allow us to stay in constant communication now. Head-up displays. So the shuttlecraft in TNG had a head-up display. It's not projected right here. It's out in front of you. All right. But commercial planes, fighter jets, cars, there's a number of different applications for head-up displays. Artificial sight. So in TNG, Geordi LaForge's visor allowed him to see. He was blind from birth. We now have implantable silicon retinas. They get implanted in your eye. They hook up to your optic nerves. They're not particularly high resolution, but these exist, and your brain learns to recognize patterns, and you see. So these are low resolution, but it actually learns to see. It gets hooked up to the optic nerve, not necessarily knowing that these nerves coming out are these rods and cones. It's just that the brain is evolved to recognize patterns, and so it starts to define patterns for you. So now we get to the ship's computer. The ship's computer is a big thing. So this is 1966. This is when Star Trek first premiered. You could talk to the computer and it could respond to you. That's voice recognition and voice synthesis. You've grown up with this over the past 10 years. All right? That was way beyond reality at that particular point in time. And yet, there it was. The computer was speaking. You would talk to the computer, ask it a question, it would talk back to you. Now we have Siri, Google, Cortana, Echo Dot. Okay? All of these things do that. Location awareness. So the ship's computer can tell you where people were and where they weren't. That's GPS. It's also RFID tags if you have location tracking based on RFID tags. But it's also LoJack. So there's a local car dealer who works on a lease-to-own basis. And so he's not selling the cars to people, he's leasing to them, and then they buy it out at the very end of the contract. How does he keep track of his cars? They're all LoJacked. He can track every single one of those cars and know where it is. He had 5 cars stolen 2 weeks ago. Guess what? They found them right away. And you can shut the car down with a LoJack. Plus, you can track children, you can track pets now with GPS. So the centralized database of all human knowledge, well, that's certainly the internet, okay, and the World Wide Web. And you know, in Star Trek, that was the ship's computer, except it was all of the galaxy's knowledge that they know of. So think about, let's go back to that. Think about how advanced that computer, that ship's computer was. The one that they imagined. They imagined that it could hear, recognize, talk, answer questions, access, had this huge database, okay, could tell where people were, knew what was going on. It was in constant communication. And so, here's the big one. A computer that is always listening and can answer just about any question you ask it. So, take the internet, combine it with Google, Siri, Cortana, Echo Dot, GPS, artificial intelligence, voice recognition, and synthesis. Right? This is the ultimate vision that Roddenberry put together for 1966 when he premiered Star Trek. He envisioned this from the very get-go on Star Trek when he put it out. And it all exists. All of it exists now. Cybernetics, so the Borg again, they were enhanced, but we have microprocessor-enabled artificial limbs that can respond to your brain waves or your hand or what you think are your hand gestures. Cochlear implants that can help the deaf hear with artificial hearts. And then we have working exoskeletons as well. So the exoskeletons can actually help people who are paralyzed walk. But they can also help perfectly enabled people do jobs they wouldn't otherwise be able to do, to help them lift 300 and 400 pounds repetitively. They are operating the exoskeleton. Artificial intelligence. Now this is science fiction, science fact, and science future. All right, so artificial intelligence. Cyborgs were introduced in Mudd's Women in the original series, and Data was certainly had artificial intelligence in TNG, and Moriarty, who was actually contrived in the holodeck so Data would have a worthy adversary. Okay, it was also artificial intelligence. So in 1966, Deep Blue, which was developed by IBM, played Kasparov, Garry Kasparov, the world chess champion at the time, and lost 4-2. The next year, it beat Garry Kasparov, the world chess champion, all right, 3.5 to 2.5 in 1997. In 1997, humans no longer were the world's chess champion. It is now computers. That was 20 years ago. In 2006, and that was a bunch of supercomputers, highly parallelized supercomputers. In 2006, a regular IBM PC with a Core Duo was the world chess champion. Not some supercomputer, a computer you can buy off the shelf in 2006, 11 years ago. Think about how far microprocessor technology has come since then. Artificial intelligence. So in 2011, IBM Watson beat Jeopardy. The two greatest Jeopardy champions ever Ken Jennings and Brad Rutter, okay, beat him in 2 straight matches. This was the close match. The second match was $77,000 to, I think it was $28,000 and $24,000. Now, Watson was actually not listening to the question. Watson was sent the question electronically, but was responding in real time and was responding via voice and was playing in real time and beat them. Now, you think about Jeopardy questions, that's a very open-ended topic. Okay, it's an incredibly open-ended topic. Watson had not been programmed to play Jeopardy. Watson had been programmed to seek answers off the internet based on the content and context of the question. So it wasn't so much that it was programmed to play Jeopardy, it was programmed to take keywords and phrases, come up with some probabilistic set of answers, and then choose the most probable answer. That's a pretty high level of artificial intelligence. So the chess games were programmed to play chess. They were actually programmed to play chess. They weren't trained to play chess. Right? They were programmed to play chess. Just this past year, Google DeepMind combined with AlphaGo, which is an application, a deep learning application, beat the world champion in the Chinese game of Go. And this is considered the most difficult of all classical board games to teach a computer how to play. The scary thing about this one, unlike Deep Blue, okay, unlike Deep Blue, which was programmed to do a specific task, play chess, AlphaGo was not programmed to play Go. It taught itself to play Go. It was given the rules of the game. That was it. It was not designed to specifically solve this problem. It was given the rules of the game, and then it played itself. And it measured the rate of success, and it played itself over and over and over again, and it used a heuristic learning algorithm and a deep neural network. And it learned to play Go so well that the only entity that can teach it anymore is itself. It now beats the world champion in Go. So that means essentially it could learn any board game, because it's not programmed to learn a board game. It is programmed to succeed at whatever rules it's given. So I know I'm going over. If you need to take off, but there's a little bit more to add here. So in 1947, so this is science fact, where your future starts. In 1947, the first transistor. In 1958, the week that I was born, the first integrated circuit. It's an op-amp. Okay? In 2017, we have billions of transistors on a square-inch chip. What's still science fiction? Well, warp drive. All right? We don't have warp drive yet. We don't have we don't have teleportation, except we actually we've done this in the U.S., but the Chinese just in July teleported a photon 500 kilometers to an orbiting satellite. It uses something called quantum entanglement, which is essentially creating two objects at the same time that have to have the same properties. Okay, and when you measure one, you know what the other one is, and it is a certain way to transmit information. Okay, and as soon as you measure the one, no matter how far away the other one is, you know what that one is. So it's a very interesting quantum theory, but they were able to do this, essentially teleport a photon to an orbiting satellite. That's far away from teleporting matter. All right, but there is actually such a thing as teleportation now. This is a very, very, very small atomic scale. We don't have Klingons. Although you may notice that the Klingons evolved from 1967 to Worf in 1988. Okay, quite a bit from their facial characteristics. Now, there is a Klingon language, and it is an active language. It has about 7,000 words, and there are 20 to 30 people that are fluent in Klingon throughout the world. It's actually taught as a college course around the country. Oh, we don't have any tribbles, okay? So you do have pets here today. Is that right? You have the pets here today? So you don't have tribbles, but it's too bad we don't have tribbles because they're just cute little things. Okay, science fact. In 1978, a megabyte of SRAM was $10,000. I know this because I worked for Susquehanna Broadcasting as a computer operator, and we replaced our core memory with 10-inch by 14-inch PCBs that cost $10,000. That is a penny a byte. In 2017, a gigabyte of flash memory is going for about $1. So that would be $10 million in 1978 dollars, unadjusted for inflation. That's how far we've come. So, where your future starts. SpaceX. The US government is no longer really pursuing space travel compared to private companies like SpaceX. That was science fiction, okay? That was science fiction that you're dealing with in the 60s. That a private company, I mean, that was part of James Bond, okay? That you'd have a billionaire, some eccentric billionaire that wanted to take over the world, and he had his own space satellites. Well, now, I'm a big fan of Elon Musk, but, you know, he could be characterized as an eccentric billionaire, and he's working his way to Mars. So what does true innovation look like? So, your future. In order for your future to expand, you have to have someone who's willing to take risks and make mistakes. So the students that are in my classes, I know that I tell them that engineering is a series of failures that leads to success, right?